Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Mark Twain said, "Suppose you are an idiot, and suppose you are a member of Congress, but I repeat myself." Mark Twain experienced a lot of extreme weather during his time. The worst heat wave on record in Southeast Australia occurred 125 years ago in 1896. The New York Times wrote an article about it, and they quoted Mark Twain. In discussing the heat, he said, "I guess we are so near our destination that it heats through the partition." That was very elegant prose by Mark Twain. Most people now would just say, "It's as hot as hell." On this date in 1901, more than two-thirds of the United States was over 100 degrees. The New York Times reported, "The city a furnace, virtually deserted." On July 1st, 1901, 25 states recorded temperatures over 100 degrees and 43 states reported temperatures over 90 degrees. Heat like that now in the United States is incomprehensible. We don't get weather that hot anymore. This week there was a heat wave in the northwestern United States and southwestern Canada. And Congressman Steve Cohen weighed in on Twitter. The Arctic ground temperature was 118 degrees Fahrenheit last weekend. Air temperatures in the Arctic were over 100 degrees for the first time in recorded history last year, and today it's 116 in Portland and 105 in Seattle. The climate crisis is unfolding before our eyes. We need more than half measures. Representative Cohen thinks we're experiencing unprecedented weather. It's caused by man, and he's going to use his congressional power to stop the bad weather. He's chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, and he's ready to strip people of constitutional rights in order to stop the bad weather. At the bottom of his profile, he has a hashtag Impeach Trump, which is another way of saying he doesn't care about the opinion of 80% of the counties in the United States which voted for President Trump. He's going to save us from greenhouse gases whether we want him to or not. Now let's look and see if any of his beliefs about climate are accurate. He said air temperatures in the Arctic were over 100 degrees for the first time in recorded history last year. And here's an article from April 30, 1937. According to Dr. Stephenson, a noted Arctic explorer, our conception of the frigid north and the sizzling equator is all wrong. The Arctic Circle is not the coldest part of the world, and the tropical zone is not the hottest part, he says. Meteorological records reveal that both the hottest spot and the coldest spot are in the so-called temperate zone. Of the several weather stations along the Amazon River, which nearly follows the equator, only one has ever recorded a temperature of as much as 100 degrees in the shade, while the weather stations on the Yukon River in the Arctic have reported temperatures of more than 100 in the shade. So we can see already that Representative Cohen has no clue what he's talking about. And here's another article which Stephenson wrote for National Geographic in 1922 explaining the same thing. He said that the U.S. Weather Bureau has recorded the temperature of 100 degrees in the shade at Fort Yukon in Alaska north of the Arctic Circle. He explained in this article that the Arctic Circle receives huge amounts of solar energy during the summer and would get extremely hot if there wasn't a lot of ice to cool it down. And here's another article from the Associated Press quoting Stephenson. Stephenson blasts theory of eternal cold, 100 degrees in shade in Arctic Circle sometimes. He said the summer temperature within the Arctic Circle averages 85 degrees and has occasionally approached 100 degrees in the shade. Here's a graphic from NASA showing how this time of year the North Pole receives more solar energy than any place else in the world. The only reason it stays cold there is because there's a lot of ice to keep the temperature down. Here's an article from 1927 about a group of motorists who tried to drive to the edge of the Arctic Ocean. Through Belgium, Holland, Germany, Denmark, Lapland, and Finland, the motor party journeyed to 270 miles north of the Arctic Circle, prepared for freezing weather. To their continued astonishment, the temperature was never less than 90 degrees in the shade. The intention was to reach the Arctic Ocean, but 40 miles of marsh country on the coast prevented this. In other words, the permafrost was melting, and at one time the car had an actual race with death among the forest fires in Sweden over terrible roads. People expect cold weather in the Arctic during the summer, and they aren't prepared for the heat. Here's an article dated January 2nd, 1927 from the Sunday Times in Perth. Sunbathing near the North Pole. The short summers of the Arctic are very warm, and this youngster sitting in the sunlight needs no protection from the cold. This picture is taken as near to the North Pole as Panama is to the equator. Here's another article from July 20th, 1957. 100 degrees in Lapland. Oslo, Norway, July 20th. Heatwave has hit northern Norway. Temperatures reached 100 degrees above the Arctic Circle. Representative Cohen is hysterical about 100 degrees in the Arctic. He thinks it's unprecedented. His knowledge of history is incorrect, as is his knowledge of science, and he also thinks that the hot weather in the Pacific Northwest is unprecedented too. But Oregon did not reach the record temperature of 119 degrees, which had occurred twice during the summer of 1898. The reality is that global temperatures are pretty close to average, as are temperatures in the Arctic. The heat wave in the northwestern United States and southwestern Canada is a very localized event. Most of the United States is well below normal temperature, as is South America. If we look at all-time record maximum temperatures in the United States, the vast majority of them occurred before 60 years ago, and the event this year isn't that unusual. Less than 3% of U.S. stations have set their all-time record maximum temperature this year. Compare that to 1936, when about 25% did. During all this record heat, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were quite low. There's no correlation between heat waves and carbon dioxide. Representative Cohen's beliefs are based on superstition, but he's ready to take action and make the hot weather stop. This graph shows the Greenland's surface mass balance for the past 5 years. The surface mass balance is the difference between snow accumulation on Greenland's surface and the amount that melts. On average, Greenland's surface gains about 400 billion more tons of snow every year than melts. During 2017 and 2018, Greenland gained a lot of excess snow. During 2019, they didn't gain as much as normal, and during 2020 and this year, they've been very close to average. The measured data from the Danish Meteorological Institute does not support the idea that Greenland's surface is melting down. Claims that Greenland is melting down are not based on reality or scientific fact. There are other factors which affect the amount of ice in Greenland's ice sheet, but the surface mass balance is the only one which is a direct indicator of the current climate. It wasn't always like this, though. In 1939, the leading Arctic expert, Dr. Hans Ullmann, reported that the glaciers of Greenland and Norway were facing the possibility of a catastrophic collapse. It was also reported in 1939 that parts of the Arctic had warmed 16 degrees during winter since 1910. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were very low at the time, so it's pretty clear that carbon dioxide does not control Arctic temperatures. If we go back further to 6,000 years ago when carbon dioxide levels were very low, the Arctic may have been ice-free. And when Stonehenge was built, trees grew all the way to the edge of the Arctic Ocean. Now the tree line is 100 kilometers further south. Arctic temperatures show no correlation with carbon dioxide. Representative Cohen's beliefs are based on propaganda he's heard and superstition, not science. And there's lots of other congressional climate clowns like former Representative Bob Inglis from South Carolina.
I was a congressman from one of the most conservative districts in South Carolina. Got on the House Science Committee, got the opportunity to go to Antarctica, and saw the evidence the Earth's atmosphere has changed. And it's the burning of fossil fuels that's changed it, creating stronger storms and higher sea levels. A lot of us conservatives would like to avoid the issue because we assume it means bigger government. We can create a new energy future that has lots of jobs and lots of wealth creation. Learn more about climate change. Go to newclimatevoices.org.
One of the most fundamental principles of mathematics and science is that you cannot measure change from a single point in time. Bob Inglis took one trip to Antarctica and determined that he was seeing change. This makes no sense, and the reality is that Antarctica is actually running extremely cold. He doesn't understand that you need to study the climate of an area for a long period of time in order to understand it. Many climate alarmists believe that when a glacier calves icebergs into the ocean, it's evidence of climate change. But that's what glaciers have always done. The excess snow which falls in the interior has to go somewhere. And what Bob Inglis was looking at was simply a glacier flowing into the sea. Glaciers have always calved icebergs, and the most famous iceberg sank the Titanic in 1912. Bob Inglis says that it's conservative to get rid of fossil fuels and that we can control the climate if we do. They tried that approach in Texas, and when the wind turbines froze up in February, lots of people lost their lives. Texas didn't have an adequate supply of fossil fuels to keep their population safe. Reliance on green energy is a recipe for guaranteed disaster. There's nothing conservative about what Bob Inglis is proposing. In fact, it's quite reckless. Green energy is not reliable, and neither is Bob Inglis' thought process. I attended an event in Washington, D.C. a few years ago when Bob Inglis said he changed his mind about climate after his kids told him they wouldn't talk to him anymore unless he did. His kids were propagandized in school by Al Gore's sci-fi flick, and they brought it home and extorted a U.S. congressman. That's not a sensible way to do science or run a government. And even if these politicians believe that carbon dioxide controls the climate, there's no evidence that politicians can control carbon dioxide. Politicians have made dozens of climate agreements since Al Gore became vice president in 1993, and none of them have had any impact on the growth of CO2 in the atmosphere, which has reached a record high under Joe Biden. This takes us back to Mark Twain's quote, "Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress, but I repeat myself." We have a lot of idiots in Congress, but politicians weren't always this dense. 1,000 years ago, King Canute took his subjects down to the sea to show them that government does not control sea level and it does not control climate. It's unfortunate we don't have politicians that wise now. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on this clown show for the past 13 years. You can visit Toto, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.